newly reconstituted National Committee on Reparations, Dr. Claudius Fergus. I just want to encourage all of us to think about an elder or an ancestor who gave you the inspiration to do the work that you are doing, whatever that work is, however it is focused on the upliftment of African people, of indigenous people, of First Peoples, and however your work contributes to our continued survival. I want you to think about an ancestor or an elder who has helped you on your journey and uplift their names. You can put it in the chat or you can say it in your mind, put that energy out into the universe, that without the work that we came here and met, we would not be doing the work that we are doing now. So with those few words, let me pass over to Dr. Claudius Fergus.
Thank you, my sister Attila, to the young panelists and other participants in this inaugural youth conference, such a very important conference. I greet you on behalf of the Trinidad and Tobago National Committee on Reparations. And I want to welcome all of you, including those who are yet to join us. What we are confronting today as reparationists is the legacy of colonialism and white supremacism. European colonialism and white supremacy are the same side of the same coin. Yes, that's what I want to say, not different sides. It is a system of extreme violence, and as Frantz Fanon expressed it, violence in its natural state. The Caribbean was the earliest crime scene of this colonial violence in the Western Hemisphere, the trauma of which is still with us today. European colonialism was built on human trafficking and enslavement of Africans and indigenous peoples. Yes, both groups were victims of European-controlled trafficking and chattel slavery. And both groups suffered similar dramatic consequences, such as multi-dimensional culture shock, loss of language, inferiority complexes, and indeed genocides. It is well established that the vast majority of victims were young people, young men and women like yourselves, small children, and even babies, sad to say. Any drawings of trafficked captives in Africa, I'm sure you would see include babies and children. In the Caribbean, children as young as 6 years old were subjected to plantation labor of the very harshest kind. And if they failed to deliver, they were severely beaten and even starved. Even those children enslaved in the great houses, the so-called great houses of the slave masters or enslavers, as we prefer to say, they will not save the terrors of enslavement. Mary Prince tells us of her personal experience as a child working in the salt mines, and they said salt work was one of the toughest that you could find in those days. But she also tells us that she was an eyewitness to the daily beatings of 2 young boys in the house where she worked at one time. I've seen their flesh ragged and raw with licks, she wrote. We know that the Spaniards did not hesitate to bash in the skulls of Taino babies against the rocks and rape children as young as 9 years old. We have to tell these stories, as sickening as they may be sometimes, so that this generation does not forget or think that we are being sentimental when we call for reparations. The Trinidad and Tobago National Committee on Reparations is a subcommittee of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which was established in 2013. After a few years of dormancy, our national committee was reconstituted last September. Our mandate is CARICOM's 10-point plan of action for reparations, and I will just list them. They are a formal apology, repatriation, an indigenous knowledge program, an African knowledge program, cultural institutions to personalize the historical context of reparations, redressing the public health issue, eradicating illiteracy, psychological rehabilitation, technological transfers, and debt cancellation. The plan, the original plan, has been revised or is being revised to include restitution of native artifacts and body parts, climate change, or as some say, climate justice, restitution of native artifacts, as I said, very important, the removal of monuments that celebrate colonial crimes and criminals, and the extension of reparations for all crimes against humanity committed during colonialism. Young people have always brought new ideas to the table, new leadership skills, new plans of action, and new directions. Some impacts are evident in the epic struggle of natives and Africans against European colonialism, in the decolonizing movements, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, in the movement to decolonize public spaces. I'll just give you some examples because as Africans, when we name our ancestors, and we say we make them live again, not just in our consciousness, but in reality. Both Sam Sharp of Jamaica and Nat Turner of Virginia were only 31 years old when they led the largest emancipation wars against slavery in the British Empire and in the United States of America, respectively. Marcus Garvey was just 27 years old when he founded the UNIA-ACL, the largest civil organization in the world. Maurice Bishop was 38 when he led the revolution against Eric Gary's government and established the second Black, truly independent state in the Caribbean. Fidel Castro was even younger at 32 when he delivered Cuba from the clutches of American neocolonialism. Thomas Sankara was 33 when he led the revolution against French neocolonialism. 1 minute again, Attila, and I would conclude. And I would land with this. Of course, I could go on and on. But I want to say hats off to the Rastafarians, I must say that, who resuscitated the call for reparations since the 1930s. I will end by honoring the young men and women who led the Black Power movement across the Caribbean from the late 1960s, especially the young men and women who transformed the movement into a true revolution in Trinidad and Tobago in 1970. I look forward to a dynamic, informative, and inspiring session, and also feedback from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fergus. Yes, he's a real talkist. That's just a little taste of the depth of knowledge and information that Dr. Fergus has, and that we hope that we will have an opportunity to share with different segments of our population as the call for reparations grows stronger across the region. So, as we continue our program this afternoon, I want to welcome Adriel Wheeler, who is representing the National Youth Council, the Tobago arm of the National Youth Council. Please, Adriel, unmute yourself. That's the message of this generation. Unmute yourself. Welcome, Adriel.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists and participants, on behalf of the Tobago Youth Council and the vibrant youth of our island, I extend warm greetings to all joining this crucial discussion on reparations in the Caribbean. Today, we gather not only to acknowledge the historical injustices that have shaped our region, but to advocate passionately for justice and equity. Reparations are not merely about compensation for past wrongs, but a moral imperative to address systematic inequalities that persist today. You see, they represent a pathway towards healing, reconciliation, and empowerment for marginalized communities across the Caribbean, including us here in Tobago and by extension, Trinidad and Tobago. As Vice President of the Tobago Youth Council, I am proud that our organization stands in solidarity with movements advocating for reparatory justice. We recognize the intergenerational impact of colonialism, slavery, and exploitation on our societies. And as a result of that, we call for meaningful dialogue and action towards redress. Our youth therefore are not just the future, but the present agents of change. And as a result of that, we urge policymakers, academics, and civil society to engage collaboratively in crafting comprehensive strategies that prioritize social justice and economic empowerment. Together, let us work towards a future where all Caribbean people can thrive with dignity and equality. And with that being said, I take this opportunity to thank you for your commitment to this vital conversation. And I want to impress on all of us to harness our collective energy and determination to build a Caribbean that truly embodies justice and reparative fairness for all. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriel, for your clear and strong words on behalf of the National Youth Council Tobago Arm. Wonderful. So now we have big things are going now. You know, I really feel that it's unfortunate that I only just learned of Senator the Honorable Genevieve Whitaker, who is our keynote speaker today. Looking through her bio, she's a mother, champion of human rights. She excels as a trained legal professional, educator, entrepreneur, and author. She has served as the CEO of Whitaker Consultant Group for over 15 years. So that means that she became a mother and a CEO at the same time. She is a certified SCORE mentor with the Small Business Administration, actively supporting entrepreneurs, and certified mindfulness life coach. Notably, she has served as senator, legislative secretary, liaison to the Department of Insular Affairs in the 34th legislature of the Virgin Islands. Genevieve is a certified public manager, also served as assistant professor and deputy supervisor of the election system, demonstrating her commitment to academia and electoral integrity. Genevieve, yes, there's plenty here that I could read. She has also played a significant role as the president and co-founder of the Virgin Islands Youth Advocacy Coalition, highlighting her commitment to empowering the youth. Genevieve holds certificates in executive education from Oxford University Side School of Business and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. She is also a 2016 fellow for the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent, further emphasizing her dedication to global advocacy. So I would encourage you to learn more about this powerhouse that we have coming to speak with us today as our keynote speaker. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Senator the Honorable Genevieve Whitaker.
Greetings. Thank you so much for that absolutely warm greeting. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and most importantly, the vibrant youth of our region. I am Genevieve Whitaker, president and co-founder of the Virgin Islands Youth Advocacy Coalition. I'm also the former legal counsel and secretary for the African Reparations and Resettlement Alliance, known as the Virgin Islands Reparations Movement. And as shared, I am a 2016 fellow for the International Decade of People of African Descent. It is an honor and a privilege to address you today on the topic of profound significance as it pertains to reparations. Our theme, Reparations for Transformation, underscores the transformative power that reparations hold for our communities, our countries, our nations, and our futures. In understanding our history, to embark on this journey of transformation, we must first ground ourselves in the rich, albeit painful history of our ancestors. The CARICOM Reparations Initiative and the 10-point plan serve as a framework for understanding the deep-seated impacts of colonialism and slavery. Our ancestors endured unimaginable hardships, physical, mental, social, cultural, and spiritual damage that have echoed through the generations. Their resilience and spirit, however, has also been passed down to us. And it is our duty to honor their legacy by addressing the injustices that they suffered. And as the chairman pointed out, as he went over the aspects of the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice, the CARICOM Reparations Commission asserts that the European governments were not only the owners and traders of enslaved Africans, but also instructed genocidal actions upon indigenous communities. They created the legal, financial, and fiscal policies necessary for the enslavement of Africans and defined and enforced African enslavement and native genocide as their national interests. They refused compensation to the enslaved. With the ending of their enslavement and compensated late slave owners at emancipation for the loss of legal property rights in enslaved Africans. And we know those stories of the aspect of why we're also working on canceling debts. Even after emancipation, they imposed further 100 years of racial apartheid and policies designed to perpetuate suffering among the emancipated and survivors of genocide. Moreover, they have refused to acknowledge such crimes or to compensate victims and their descendants. And to reiterate the 10-point plan, yes, the formal apology, statements of regret are insufficient and do not acknowledge the crimes committed. We need a sincere apology from the European governments and other governments. Repatriation, establishing a program, which we have seen a lot of actions by countries within the African continent. Of course, we have requests that we can actually return and find our distant families and the like. Indigenous Peoples Movement Program, addressing the genocide committed upon Native Caribbean populations and providing development plans for the rehabilitation. And as an aside, I had the opportunity to go to Denmark, which is one of the main colonizers of what is now the Virgin Islands of the United States, whereby within the Danish National History Museum, they still have a lot of our items to include, remains and items that really needs to be returned to us. Cultural institutions, creating institutions in the Caribbean to tell scientific and historical truths of these crimes against humanity. And as also expressed already, the public health crisis, the continuing aspects of the impact of slavery upon us as African descendants. We continue to be plagued as a result of a lot of harm caused in the health area. Illiteracy eradication, collaborating with European governments to eradicate the widespread literacy left by colonial powers. African Knowledge Program, building bridges along through, whether we're looking at school exchanges, cultural tours, and other programs. The psychological rehabilitation, addressing the massive psychological trauma. Technology transfer, including the Caribbean and the global technology and science culture from which it was historically excluded. And as shared already, the debt cancellation, canceling the debt of the Caribbean governments that have inherited as a result of colonialism. We look at that even from a legal perspective of unjust enrichment. The rationale for reparations are not just about financial compensation. It's about acknowledging and rectifying historical wrongs. The rationale for reparations lies in the lasting impact of slavery and colonialism. The physical scars may have healed, but the mental and emotional wounds persist. Reparations offers a way of healing of these wounds, restoring dignity and creating opportunities for communities to thrive. There are means to address systemic inequities and to invest in holistic well-being of our people. Relevance to today's youth. Today, we must ask ourselves, I am a millennial, and on the older millennials, right? What does reparations mean to us? How do they impact our lives as we also look to the younger individuals? For the youth, reparations represent hope and a tangible commitment to justice. There's a recognition of our struggles and promise for a better future. Reparations can transform our education systems, improve healthcare, create employment opportunities, and enrich our cultural and spiritual lives. They can reshape our worldview and instill within us a renewed sense of self-worth. The role of us within the struggle for emancipation. The youth, as shared already, have been at the forefront of social change. As I always, as I share stories of various leaders, how young they were as they led efforts. And the struggle for reparations is no different. Our energy, creativity, and determination are crucial in driving this movement forward. We must educate ourselves and peers about the importance of reparations, advocate for policies that support reparations, and hold our leaders accountable. As an aside right now, I wanted to share that as I served in the Virgin Islands legislature, it was one of my main goals, which I did, was to restore our youth senate, known as the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. As the current legislature has been constituted and has been going on for over a year and a half now, they have refused to continue with that. And so as young people, we continue to rally for our youth infrastructure. We must also engage in actions that promote transformation, education, healthcare, employment, culture, and spirituality. And as we'll go through today and having a discussion around understand what does reparations mean to today, what is my role, what can we do next? When we talk about what it means to me today and it relates to the Virgin Islands, in the Virgin Islands, like much of the Caribbean, the legacy of slavery and colonialism is evident in our social, economic, and political structures. We are still, we are second-class citizens. In fact, a few months ago, my law school has been convening on the matter of the insular cases. These are Supreme Court cases that peg us as aliens of a foreign, we're aliens. We're still labeled and mislabeled as aliens, and that we cannot essentially govern ourselves. And still within the U.S. jurisprudence. Reparations today means acknowledging history and ongoing impact. It means seeking justice not only for past wrongs, but for the systemic inequities that persist. What is my role? As youth, our role is to be the torchbearers. We can start by advocating for the implementation of the CARICOM 10-point plan within our local context. We can engage in community education, raising awareness about reparations. We can participate in local regional initiatives that support the reparations movement. Our role is to be vocal, active, and relentless in our pursuit of justice. And in advancing the movement, the next step will be about bringing us together in a spirit of unity as we are doing tonight. And in terms of, and as someone who is trained, I am trained in all the international human rights law mechanisms. In 2019, on behalf of my youth organization and on behalf of the Virgin Islanders, we submitted what is known as a Universal Periodic Review Report, highlighting the treatment of Virgin Islanders, us as Virgin Islands, under the U.S. flag. And so, and key among I'll go briefly of the key recommendations made in that report was for the U.S. government to develop and work with us on a plan for decolonization, to end what we experience as Virgin Islanders of unfair health practices, in terms of some of the healthcare aid packages that are not on par with fellow Americans, land right violations. We were working, to really establish a referendum process, protection of religious freedoms. One of the groups that worked with my organization is the Rastafarian community, as they have experienced, and even a local level, discrimination based on their religious choices and their religious rights. Promotion of regional integration. One of the things that we continue to work on as advocates of the Virgin Islands being more part of the CARICOM, we continue to advocate that our participation in our regional groups, as well as Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and other regional groups. For some time now, along with my fellow youth advocates, we have championed the restoration of the Youth Council, as I shared a little short while ago, as well as our involvement in the matter of decolonization. Key among this as well is building of delegations. Let us amplify our voices to ensure that youth concerns and solutions are heard. We must build delegations of youth representatives to attend meetings and advocate for reparatory justice within local government bodies. This includes, as I shared, of course, obviously CARICOM, very key. the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the Organization of American States, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the African Union, United Nations, and European Union. By engaging in these platforms, we can present our demands, share our solutions, and build a network of support that transcends the borders. So in closing, as we embark on these discussions this evening, let us remember that the fight for reparations is a collective effort. It requires unity, perseverance, and a steadfast belief in the power of justice. Let us be inspired by our ancestors, resilience, fueled by our vision for a transformed future. Together, we can make reparations a reality and create a world where justice and equity prevail. I leave you with these powerful words of Benjamin Zephaniah from his poem, What Stephen Lawrence Has Taught Us. It is not now an open secret Black people do not have chips on their shoulders. They just have injustice on their backs and injustice on their minds. And now we know that the road to liberty is as long as a road from slavery. These words serve as a powerful reminder of the injustices we carry and the justices we strive to achieve. Thank you all for your attention and commitment to this crucial dialogue. I look forward to the rest of tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Yes, hi, greetings everyone. So my name is Renee Francois. I'm one of the program officers at Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to welcome all the participants who are joining us here via Zoom or YouTube. Senator Honorable Genevieve Whitaker, I want to thank you so much for that really amazing feature and setting the tone for the rest of today's discussion. So next, we're going to go on to our first panel, and it's entitled Understanding Our History and What Does Reparations Mean to Me Today. Our panelists this evening will be Amandla Thomas Johnson and Dr. Tyehimba Solange. Amandla Thomas Johnson is a journalist, an author, and recently a PhD graduate. So I want to extend congratulations to Amandla. He has been employed and works with BBC News, Al Jazeera, and he has done a lot of work on the different, topics and events on the African continent. So at this point, I would like to welcome our first panelist, Amandla.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Francois. Just a small correction, I have not completed my PhD as yet, so I'm not quite a doctor, but I appreciate the vote of thanks. I'd originally planned to talk about one thing, but I'm going to have to talk about another thing because of events that have taken place the last few weeks, namely Hurricane Beryl. So colonialism has created a world of unequal relation between countries, where if you are born in a certain part of the world, you're condemned to a life of poverty and struggle. Therefore, I see reparations as not just trying to repair the past, but to also secure a just and equitable future. Hilary Beckles, chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, has said, it took us the entire 19th century to uproot slavery. Then it took another 150 years to get to independence in the Caribbean. The next phase is reparations. If it takes another 100 years, then it will be consistent with our history. We're all well aware of the need for reparations because of the enslavement of our African ancestors, or because our indigenous ancestors were exterminated en masse and turfed off their land. But there is another side to reparations I would like to consider, and that is to do with climate justice. I'm speaking to you today from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a country that was hit by Hurricane Beryl last week. My family is from Union Island, a small island of about 3,000 people, and the southern end of the island chain that makes up St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the part of the country that was hardest hit by last week's storm. My family have lived on Union Island for hundreds of years, first as the enslaved, then as fishermen and farmers, then as seafarers, shop owners. It's where my ancestors are buried. Now, 90% of the buildings on the island are destroyed or damaged, including all but one of my family's homes. Our family photos, our letters, some of our cultural artifacts, the fragile archives, hundreds of years in the making that we can pass down to our next generation, blew away or were destroyed in a matter of minutes. I want you to try and picture that place you call home. Maybe it is a neighborhood in Trinidad and Tobago, could be Chaguanas, could be Buku, where my dad was born, could be Arima, could be San Fernando, Eastport of Spain. I'm seeing people here from London, maybe it's Hackney or Peckham, to the Jamaicans out there, Spanish Town, Kingston, Bajans, see at least one Bajan, Bridgetown, Cave Hill. Imagine that place you call home, and then one day waking up to find it in ruins. Your house gone, your school gone, all your belongings gone. You can't even charge your phone or watch the television because there's no electricity and no signal. Toilet doesn't flush, little to no water. Maybe like people in Union Island right now, you're living in a camp, eating canned food, not knowing when or if things will ever be the same. Or maybe you've been evacuated and you're not sure if you can ever go back home again. What happened in Union Island can happen anywhere, especially in the Caribbean. I flew here from Trinidad on Saturday after seeing images posted on the family WhatsApp group of the devastation Beryl left behind. Union was unrecognizable. Residents wandered an apocalyptic landscape of roofless homes, toppled electricity poles, and bowed coconut palms. In one disorientating video stood the shell of my late grandmother's home, its roof torn off and windows blown out. As the only grandchild of my grandmother born in Britain, the 1940s cream-colored concrete house perched on a hill above the little cemetery where my ancestors are buried and where she is now buried, and which looked out across the deep blue sea at Carriacou and Grenada, was a home away from home. It was where I'd watch my grandmother stir the wongu pois, the local dish made of cornmeal and peas, as she taught me the family's lineage and local culture. It's where I played with my cousins, where I had my first bush bath, very reluctantly, and where I caught my first chicken. By Tuesday evening last week, some family members, including my 104-year-old great-grand-aunt, had been safely evacuated to the St. Vincent mainland, but others on the island weren't so lucky. So far, the hurricane has claimed 6 lives on the island, and others on neighboring Carriacou and Grenada have also died. As my family left an island where they had resided since at least the 1800s, I wondered if they would ever return. Would they become like those exiled from Montserrat, the Caribbean island buried beneath a sea of volcanic ash in the mid-1990s? And was this another chapter in the Caribbean's history of displacement and empire? European slave ships had brought my ancestors to these islands. Was climate change caused by Western powers now forcing us to leave? Beryl is unprecedented, as we all know. It sets the record for the earliest Category 4 hurricane with maximum sustained wind speeds of 165 miles per hour. That's 266 kilometers per hour, right? Hurricanes of this size tend to happen much later in the season, once seas have had time to warm. Caribbean leaders, most notably Barbados' Prime Minister Mia Mottley, have long warned of the dangers faced by frontline small island developing nations. At COP28, UN Climate Change Conference held in Dubai last year, countries reached a historic agreement to establish a loss and damage fund to compensate those countries suffering from the adverse effects of climate change. Too bad for Beryl's victims, because the fund, hosted by the World Bank and more institutions, will not become operational until at least COP29 later this year. With this country reeling from Beryl, St. Vincent and the Grenadines' Prime Minister, Ralph Gonsalves, called on the major emitters of greenhouse gases to immediately make more money available, and he branded COP a talking shop. Scholars say that there is a link between the climate crisis and empire. For instance, Georgetown University professor Olufemi Taiwo writes in Reconstituted Reparations, a book released, I think, just last year, that, quote, the climate crisis arises from the same political history as racial injustice and presents a challenge of the same scale and scope, right? Profits derived, end quote. Profits derived from enslaved Africans working on plantations on islands such as Union, which was actually a cotton plantation, which Britain, profits derived from enslaved Africans working on plantations, heralded the rise of industrial revolution and capitalism, fueling a further scramble for resources and markets into the 19th century. Coal-fueled, sorry, just bear with me one moment. Coal-fueled the textile mills and the Royal Navy warships that secured Britain's imperial dominance, later giving way to gas and oil. Taiwo argues that our political and economic systems are part of the legacy of what he calls a global racial empire, and that, quote, the people who will be most protected from climate crises tend to be whites in the global north, and those least protected tend to be black and indigenous peoples in the global south, end quote. The expansion of European and American empires has been dependent on fossil fuels, and so the climate crisis is one of several crises that stem from colonialism that the Caribbean is now dealing with. Caribbean states have some of the world's lowest greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions for the Caribbean and Latin America combined account for less than 10% of the global total. Yet, as we have seen with Union Island, Caribbean nations are among the world's countries most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Added to this is a chronic economic underdevelopment of places like Union Island. I spoke to a senior civil servant responsible for infrastructure last night, and he said the country simply doesn't have the money to repair the island. We'll need to appeal to aid agencies or take out loans, which will come at high interest rates. As you may know, economic underdevelopment stems from enslavement and colonialism. Years of neglect following the abolition of slavery in the 1830s meant that Union was only electrified a few years before it achieved independence from Britain as part of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 1979. After independence, the island's muddy tracks were replaced with roads and a medical center was built. Now the country doesn't have the power to rebuild. As I talk to you, I can actually see the island of Mesquite. For any of you who know Mesquite, the British royal family have a house there. Tommy Hilfiger, Mick Jagger, the von Bismarck family have homes there. So this is really a place where you see the haves and the have-nots, those who have been the beneficiaries of colonialism and those who are its losers, so to speak. And to overcome the legacies of empire and chronic underdevelopment, Caribbean leaders, as we know, have crafted a 10-point plan for reparatory justice, calling on European governments to pay up for their involvement in African enslavement and native genocide. The plan is ambitious, but I think it can go further in some respects. It could address the experience of Caribbean women, for example, It could address the experience of Caribbean women, for example, and also explicitly tie climate justice to reparations. Crucially, it could do more to address the global economic and political order, which is now US-led, that led to the devastating structural adjustment policies of the 1980s, as well as the current invasion of Haiti. I am pleased, just to say this, to hear from Dr. Fergus that some of these points will be incorporated into an updated CARICOM reparations plan. One video that appeared on my phone in the last few days from Union Island showed the little cemetery sandwiched between my grandmother's home and the sea, the same cemetery where she was laid to rest at the age of 95 in 2019. The wall on one side had crumbled and the wooden crucifixes recently placed on fresh burial mounds sat askew. For people who have been severed from the African past, cemeteries offer new points of origin, dates, and names. A granite slab marks the grave of my great-great-grandparents, born in the 1870s as children of the enslaved. In the desperate years following the abolition of slavery, they came to Union from the neighboring island of Canouan, also hit by the hurricane. Jonas Ferrari set up as a shipwright, and his wife, Aunt Noble Adelaide Garraway, as a homemaker. Their children then took off again in search of work, as did the generations that followed. These were the characters that populated my grandmother's stories, of children sent to grow up with distant relatives, fishermen who failed to return from sea and their weeping widows, men who went off to build the Panama Canal, or in my grandfather's case, went to Britain as part of the Windrush generation. These are stories of ruptured families and unsteady belonging in an era of a colonial neglect. But Union Island was always there, a reference point, an actual place we could call home, wherever we ended up. For how long it will remain so is anyone's guess. Just to finish off, sort of 3 points. So to reiterate, colonialism has created a world of unequal relations between countries, where if you were born in a certain part of the world, you are condemned to a life of poverty and struggle. To overcome this, we have to think globally, addressing the continuance of empire in all its manifestations. We must think about climate change as part of any discussion on reparations, and therefore I see reparations as not just trying to repair the past, but also to secure a just and equitable future as well. Thank you very much.
Hi again, everyone. Thank you, Amandla, for that really thought-provoking contribution and really bringing home again the idea that advocating for climate change, and that's also part and parcel of the reparations movement. I think that's something that really stood out to me. At this point, we would like to invite Dr. Tayamba Salandi. He is the director of ICA Institute. He also runs his own ecological farm, and he is a sociologist and just really has a great understanding, not of just Trinidad and Tobago society, but our Caribbean region as well. So welcome, Dr. Kayamba.
Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here to share some thoughts on the issue of reparations. I'm not sure how many of you are football fans. I do not watch much football, but I have been following on and off the ongoing Euro football competition. And one of the stars of the Spanish side is a 16-year-old by the name of Lamine Yamal. And I say his name and I talk about him because he is just 16 years old and he is representing one of the so-called top football clubs in the world, as well as the Spanish team, where he is having a very significant contribution to the overall team. In the context of the Caribbean, in terms of the social structures that we have inherited, there have been so much reluctance to properly include the contributions of young people in the direction of the society. And so we have so much brilliant young people with things to contribute, but the structures of society are not really amenable to them making their proper contribution. And I say that in the context of a number of key historical events, including the 1970s Black Power movement, that young people were an important part of driving some of the most fundamental changes in our society. So the topic of youth involvement in various movements is very important. As a young person in high school, secondary school, doing mathematics, I was taught Pythagoras' theorem. And my teacher became very upset when I provided evidence that there were indigenous people using the so-called Pythagoras theorem thousands of years before Pythagoras even existed. Years later, in other disciplines, I was taught about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and the contributions of these great white men of the Enlightenment period as underlying many disciplines, including psychology, sociology, natural sciences, etc. And I say this because slavery and colonialism have not only enslaved and brutalized Black and brown bodies, but there has been disruptions in knowledge systems in which the contributions of non-white people to a whole set of different areas have been excluded and marginalized. So I'm talking about Africa not only as the origins of human beings approximately 200,000 years ago, as the science shows us, but I am talking about the origins of science, math, religion, and many other things that we use and interface as aspects of so-called Western civilization that actually came from deeper indigenous roots. Today, we stand at the intersection of many interlocking forms of imbalance and injustice. Our internal digestive and chemical system is out of balance. We have more and more people suffering from mental health issues. We have various ecological disasters that we are now coming to terms with. We have social imbalances. We have a whole range of covert and overt illegal wars that are still ongoing. And one of the biggest sources of these imbalances and injustices have been European domination and colonialism over the last 500 years. And I don't think that we have even started to come to terms with the depths at which we have been disrupted from a sort of connection to a whole range of tools and ways of healing and ways of connecting to our deeper selves, that whole 500-year process of European domination have disrupted. In a sense, reparations is not only about dealing with past systems of colonialism and slavery and European domination, but it is also about coming to terms with how these past structures of brutality have again manifested itself in ongoing structures of neoliberalism, capitalism, and empire. And even even as we talk about these ongoing systems, at least 12 territories in the Caribbean still belong to American and European powers. So the issues of colonialism and self-determination are still ongoing issues that have to be factored in terms of the ongoing dialogue of reparations. One of the biggest contradictions of the reparations movement is that even as Caribbean leaders articulate words of reparatory justice and have signed on to different reparations plans, including the CARICOM 10-point plan, the reality is that post-independence leaders and post-independence structures have been guilty of violence against its own citizens. So in many ways, Caribbean leaders themselves owe apologies and owe reparations to their own internal citizens. And they have not yet, most of them, done and made proper efforts to dismantle systems of injustice coming from the colonial period that filter into the present. So according to a 2022 inequality report, less than 10% of the population in the Caribbean own more than 80% of the wealth. So I am talking about systems of brutality and violence continued by post-independence governments, even as they articulate and talk words of reparations. And one clearest example of this is the experience of Rastafarians, including Rastafarian children throughout the Caribbean, where many of them were barred from participating in the formal education system. And even when they were admitted, they were subjected to all forms of abuse. Even today, we have young, bright children full of potential and promise, going to school and having a whole set of negative experiences because of their natural African hairstyles that they may wear. And I saw a case in Tobago of this just a couple of days ago. So all throughout the Caribbean, many of the issues that our elders would have been advocating for and talking about for the past 50 years, many of these issues are still present. We have in Trinidad what is called a savings clause, where at independence, what we signed on to included a clause that we cannot change laws that were set in place by Britain before independence. So we are so-called independent, but yet we are saddled with laws and governance systems that has given us a two-party Westminster system where political power have been concentrated in the hands of two main political parties at the cost of our genuine independence. So reparations has to involve not just refashioning relations between Caribbean countries and the global international landscape and global powers, but a major part of that has to involve how we as Caribbean people interface with these crop of post-independence leaders who have not really seen the benefit of dismantling the structures of inequality and injustice that still pervade throughout the Caribbean. And I say this in the context of something that is called adverse childhood experiences. And even today, as there have been many concerns about the direction of our young people and poor choices that are supposedly being made by our youth, there has not been enough attention given to the context of our youth and how the surrounding context, especially in terms of the experience of what is called adverse childhood experiences, which provides a framework to understand how different factors, including child abuse, drug use, choices of parents, and general family context could impact the direction and context of the life of a young person. So we have a whole set of people experiencing very negative social context that means that we are not giving our young people the tools to navigate a complex and hostile modern environment. And so the instances of mental health and so-called deviance are things that are rampant, but we are not giving priority to understanding all of these issues at the root causes. So just in conclusion, I just want to reiterate the importance of connecting not just to the experiences of slavery and colonialism, but also to pre-colonial history and the contributions of a wide range of people to what we know today as modern life, and the importance of developing tools, indigenous bottom-up tools to heal from the ongoing traumas of the injustices and imbalances of the present system. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Solandi, for your contribution. And, ending that note on relying on our own Indigenous knowledge to help us push through for reparations and that idea of self-healing, self-repair. At this point, I would like to invite Kate Flavius. Please excuse me if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong. She's currently enrolled at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Faith, welcome.
Hi, thank you for introducing me. My name is Faith Fabius. So I would just like to incorporate what the panelists spoke about along with what I thought would be important to share today. And I wanted to start off with an article I read recently by Carl Campbell, and he was noting the social stratification system in Trinidad in the 18th century. And it started off with, of course, the Black persons in Trinidad, then it went to Sambo, then there was Mongrel. Now, after Mongrel, there was Cambry and then Mulatto. And then there were 3 stages again until White. But I want to point out specifically that Mongrel category and to reflect on what we use that word for today. And that for me symbolizes something wider because it's such a simple word we use to refer to a dog, right? But we are so unaware of how heavy the history is behind such a simple word. And just drawing from, that classification or that category, it speaks to the dehumanization, the demonization of our people during not only enslavement, but throughout colonialism. And I like that the panelists touched on the racial and social structures that sought to bind white colonial supremacy, and appropriated Black bodies, Black family units, culture, religion. These were suppressed, these were appropriated, scholarship as well, the youth. All of these were minimized. And what I really want to emphasize, and I think the panelists did as well, is the post-emancipation period. I think there is this tendency for a lot of persons to think that the legacies of colonialism or enslavement stopped after 1834, 1838. But I want to emphasize that post-emancipation era and up to independence and even after, right? I think what stands out to me is looking at health. When we think about the social implications of colonialism, and I like that mental health was brought up, but I also want to think about health in general. When we think about that impoverishment, the poverty, the food insecurity, we look at the post-emancipation era, looking at the 1930s, the Moyen Commission report shows the diets, the poor diets, the heavily starch-based diets, the starvation that existed, and just that general impoverishment that existed during these periods and going up to independence, sorry. And even pointing to work by Hilary Beckles, he noted in his most recent book how Britain underdeveloped the Caribbean. He pointed out even after independence, Eric Williams, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago at the time, he asked for 2 million in bursaries, pounds, and 9 million pounds in loans for the erasure of impoverishment and slums and poverty that existed in the Caribbean, even post independence. And I just want to kind of reiterate and incorporate the implications of these circumstances on health. And there is a lot of literature that shows the connections between that impoverishment, that food insecurity, that epidemic of dependency, and the implications those had on the diets in the region, their health, right? And why we have a prevalence of hypertension, diabetes, why we have certain deficiencies. These are all things that still exist today. These are not things that stopped after 1834 or 1838. So I just want to stress on that post-emancipation era. I also would like to, and I'm glad that the panelists brought it up as well, infrastructural development, the lack thereof, or the underdevelopment of infrastructural development and the implications for that on climate change and how we deal with climate change. All of these things affect us presently. And so when we think of reparations today, it is more than just, a statement of regret, of course. It is more than just an apology, but it has to be, a method of understanding, and recognizing all of these wounds that we have subconsciously, all of these legacies that we are unaware of, and making those connections between the circumstances and situations that existed and then what it has led to or molded presently. It is also a process of collective healing, of reclamation, of reconciliation. And I think most importantly, when I think of reparations today, I think of equity, as a means of social justice. And so that is what I would like to stress on. I really think that reparations today, it is really a mean of, to navigate reparations. It really is, to understand our circumstances presently. So that is what I would like to contribute. Thank you.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Faith. At this time, I would like to welcome back Amandla and Dr. Tayamba. Yes, so yes, we have back with us Amandla, Dr. Tayamba, and of course, Faith is staying here with us for the rest of this discussion. I think one of, sort of trying to continue discussion from here, I want to continue on Faith's point about equity, and particularly equity in the global financial space, and how that can relate to reparations and giving us here in the Caribbean better footing in just taking care of our citizens. I also at this time want to welcome persons who just joined us and let persons know to please put in the chat any questions or comments you might have for our guests. Yeah. So feel free, anyone.
I'm happy to go for it.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think that we can't look at it as just a cancellation of debt, or making sure that we're no longer in the red. I think we need to completely rethink the global economic system, because it's that system of extraction where countries in Africa and Asia are basically supplying raw materials that are then manufactured, added value into in the West. It's that system basically that keeps things where they are, right? So we need to rethink the entire system, which is why I say that whatever CARICOM does, whatever we do in the Caribbean, we have to think about how it links globally, right? That's really important. And the Caribbean is just one part of a much larger system, even though it's an integral part and historically was integral to the foundation of that system of sort of global capitalism. We have to also understand how these forces work beyond our shores as well. So it's not an easy task, but as I said, I think reparations should try and ensure it's almost as though we have to think about this. Someone explained, I can't remember who it was. It's like the Matrix, right? We have to sort of use reparations to like come out of one reality and into another reality, basically, right? That's kind of how I see it. When we think about abolition and these things, they're all sort of bound up reparations as well.
All excellent points, and I thoroughly agree with the point about challenging the dominant global economic system. And I haven't seen many Caribbean leaders talk and make movements to challenge this. Many of them are too happy to get a simple seat at the global table without recognizing that there is something fundamentally wrong with capitalism and neoliberalism and all of these structures and processes that put profits over people and the environment. And so even in thinking about reparations, we have to come to terms with the fact that many Caribbean countries have signed on to economic agreements that we're not even aware of. So we may see our governments and leaders making decisions and making choices, but they are making choices within the context of agreements that they have signed on to from the World Trade Organization and other so-called global governing bodies. And the inequalities of the international global system, it simply mirrors and reflects what happens on the ground in the internal set of processes all across the Caribbean. So I'm talking about a whole range of interconnected inequities of racism, colorism, gender, class. That means that you could be the brightest, smartest person with the most integrity, and still the structures of power would simply exclude you because you do not fit that sort of ideal that they may be looking for.
Yeah, and I think if you don't mind me just sort of also saying that, I think there's also a contradiction in terms of priorities of Caribbean nations as well. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada get hit by a hurricane, but yet some Caribbean countries are pursuing fossil fuels like there's no tomorrow, including Grenada actually as well, right? So what are our priorities? It doesn't quite add up. That way, yeah. I mean, there was a show agreement just announced yesterday, I think, in Trinidad and Tobago, just off Mayaro, as well. So we have to think about these things as well, right? That as much as we're talking about tackling climate and stuff, we're also investing in contributing to climate change as well, right? And so how can we do the two things at the same time? That's something to think about as well.
Sorry, Senator Genevieve, sorry, you were going to say something?
Yes, I just want to highlight something as well. When we talk about this internalized racism, which we experience throughout our countries, I want to highlight when I came home from law school, I dove right into the Virgin Islands reparations movement. And you all may or may not believe, actually, our government was against it. And I have to be more specific even. Our legislature at that time actually supported the reparations movement, but our actual governor at that time, Governor Percy DeYoung, we were working on convening a delegation to head to Denmark as we worked on negotiations around reparations. So what you find is not only are you fighting against a colonial power, you're also fighting this internalized racism that we experience by our leaders. And even to the point about youth here in the Virgin Islands, you'd find it very strange that even as a former senator, I'm also again seeking public office, that I have to fight to get the restoration of our youth senate. I have to fight to get our youth commission that's under our governor. And so there's, for me, one of the things that we continue to have to work on as youth is creating the spaces, because also too, that also comes out with, us, standing our ground when we notice our countries have continued to move away. And there's some places that still, yes, they still have the youth commission, youth councils, but in those places where literally we have persons right here, not necessarily the colonizers, we have persons who are, so that's part of also the struggle as well. Our leaders, whether appointed, elected, that, essentially have taken the place of massa, as we say.
I just wanted to throw a concept into the conversation, because we really wanted to examine what does compensation look like for us here in the Caribbean, considering, again, the toll of chattel slavery, transatlantic slave trade, and of course, the entire system of colonialism. What's the viewpoint or the perspective, or how do you as reparation activists feel about affirmative action here in the Caribbean? And also seeing how it has been implemented in the US. Anybody, please.
I'll jump in the sense of there has been most recently in the US, we're going backwards, right? So the Supreme Court decision to push us back to, because we're going backwards in this country here in America. That's why I stand firm on that. And so far that even the latest affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court even impacted small businesses. There's a special program for disadvantaged people of color under the U.S. Small Business Administration. And even that action has impacted that program. And so we talk about economic oppression in modern day. We see ways in which we still experience that. And then even just as a point, when I was in law school, I had a chance to go to Hawaii. In one of the, where a lot of law school students from across the country. And the challenge we spoke about in Hawaii was of Native Hawaiians even being able to go to law school. And some of the, and so essentially affirmative action, this is a series of cases have come out with affirmative action, where there are a number of Native Hawaiians who are not even able to go to law school. And so we find ourselves just going back, and that's how history repeats itself. And so there's a lot of struggles in that regard. So affirmative action is still up in the air. We still have to revisit it and restore it what the pivotal purpose of affirmative action is. Yeah.
In addition, I would like to see post-independence governments own up to their own choices and their own brutalities, and not only apologize in a sense, but also make concrete moves to address choices that they would have made. And in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, I can talk about governments fighting against the young people who were articulating ideas about Black Power, not including the history of the Black Power movement on the curriculum, having committees to actually weed out alternative forms of knowledge and what they termed subversive elements within the trade union movement, and even banning persons such as Kwame Ture, who they considered subversive, and radical. So that there is a whole history there, apart from the colonial one, that Caribbean governments have not owned up to. So if we need to look at getting to the roots of certain issues, persons who made certain choices have to take responsibility for that and to have public dialogue about a whole range of issues. So I'm not convinced that many Caribbean governments and leaders who articulate positions of support and reparations really mean it. And if they do, then the best place to start will be their own choices and dealing with reparations within the internal context.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to bounce off TM's point, and by the way, apologies for jumping in earlier and not giving Genevieve opportunity to respond. Apologies for that. But just to bounce off Zimbo's point, I guess what's interesting is the way that you know, the post-colonial nation state continues the work of the colonial nation as well, right? And we have to be very honest about that. Just because they're Black or whatever doesn't mean that, you know, power is working in a different way. You know, like there are very powerful class interests, that are continuing here, and we have to be very honest about that. And one of the things that I sometimes think about, you know, living in Trinidad and Tobago since last year, is the way that the discourse, especially around criminality, right, around poor Black people, is kind of used as a sort of anti-Black discourse, and this is a discourse that can come from the 1%ers, and can come from Black people themselves, and come from all sections of society, right? And how that seems to exclude and criminalize certain sectors of society in such a way that we miss the reasons why, the context, as Tahimba mentioned earlier, why they're in this situation in the first place, right? Every you pick up a newspaper in Trinidad and Tobago, it's you know, four shootings in Tobago yesterday. You know, police kill how many in St. Augustine the other day? Like it's just a constant barrage, and it's more law and order, more sort of US style policies that we're importing in order to deal with it. And I think we need to really look beyond this focus on criminalization, because I think it really hides something quite profound and deep about what the post-colonial nation state is doing. So I think that's something that we need to think about. And I think to go back to a point made earlier, it's important that civil society have a big say in the CARICOM reparations sort of you know, moving forward, and they hold governments to account as well, right? I think this is like really important part of the process as well. So yeah, just to end there.
Okay, so at this time, I would like to ask Faith, or invite Faith, to make any comments based on the discussions that has been going on so far. And following which, I would like to, I know that Adriel had his hand up. He would like to either ask a question or make a contribution himself. So Faith, and then Adriel, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to respond to the possibility of affirmative action. Actually, I had the opportunity to visit the University of Belize this May, and there is quite a large Maya population in Belize, which I think was a shock for me, and I think maybe for many people. But one of the Maya staff members and lecturers, he raised the point so audaciously but rightfully, and he said, out of 89 staff members, there are only 3 Maya persons on staff, and that is academic staff. So out of 89, there are only 3, right? And I just found that very interesting. So I think we need to look at those spaces and acknowledge those spaces. And I do think it's a possibility there. You know, it made me reflect on Trinidad and Tobago, which is where I am right now. And I do think it is definitely a bit more complex. I think it is a lot more internalized racism, a lot of civil warfare, to, you know, put it a bit dramatically, but also accurately. But I do think, you know, it is definitely something that is a possibility, and I think would add to the table or the position of equity.
Right. So before we go on to Adriel, I just want to kind of make a contribution based on my own experience. So I was part of that generation that benefited from Gates, and it allowed me to pursue two degrees. My first at the University of the West Indies, and then my second at Costa. And I want to say that something like assisting persons who typically would not be able to afford tertiary level of education or would need greater assistance goes, to me, a far way in as part of that repertory process. Now, with that being said, you benefit from reparations in this way, but you cannot negate that idea of self-repair and building your consciousness as a person of African descent, and also understanding the experiences of our indigenous people here in the Caribbean who are also victims, who would have also been victims of crimes against humanity. So I don't want to talk too much. I just want to invite Adriel to make his comment or question. Adriel?
Thank you so much. So just to give a bit of personal information about myself, I am directly out of 6-4, meaning that I just left. And as vice president of the Tobago Youth Council and as a young person in Tobago, I feel as though it is imperative for us to ask the crucial questions, yet somewhat generic, so that those persons who may be ignorant as to what, the whole topic of reparations entail can have a starting ground. And for me, I've always wondered if we tell our story from a place of being, I guess, disempowered, because personally, I feel as though the enslavement is something that showcases the resilience of the Black people. And I am totally in agreement with reparations, but I feel as though there needs to be a shift in the way we tell our story. For me, I feel as though that story is told from a place of us being victims, and we would mention on the side, yet we thrive, but not showcase to our youths how exactly we've thrived, understanding, how difficult these circumstances were, the living conditions. We are talking about enslaved people being cramped up on ships like sardines, we're talking about them not having access to doctors. We're talking about them, living in cramped spaces, being, deprived of food, and they're working for long periods of time. That, for me, is a story of resilience. And therefore, one of the questions that I have for the panel is, do you feel as though our youth are aware of the effects of enslavement and the ripple effect it has had on Black descendants? Because to a certain extent, I am a firm believer that some of us are still mentally enslaved, if you allow me to speak frankly. We live in a society whereby cultural erasure is extremely prevalent. And as a result of that, we feel when we talk in Creole, so if me have to come on here and talk a little Creole, people say that me attack bad. But the reality of this situation is that, it is something that our ancestors use in learning the language of English, given that it wasn't innate for them. So I think it is imperative that we begin to sensitize our young people. And if it is, you guys feel as though that is not being done as effective as it should be, what are your suggestions in that regard?
Dr. Tyamba, I don't know if you want to take this, because I know you've been engaging a lot of advocacy, particularly with our education system and our curriculum here in Trinidad and Tobago, but other persons as well, feel free to comment.
Yeah, sure. So I do think that there is not enough awareness of the psychological and sociological aspects of white supremacy. So people are experiencing the ill effects of all of this, but we do not have enough of the language and the tools to understand it holistically. For example, there's often a lot of talk about mental health, but this is often spoken about in a vacuum, and it is spoken about often with reliance on Western and American frameworks of healing. And we don't talk about mental health in relation to colonialism, in terms of racism, colorism, and all of the brutalities that people existed. So if we are to look at the mental health incidences in the Caribbean, how can we address that without dealing with one of the major sources of imbalance over the last 500 years? And if a person is having an issue and they go to a mental health specialist, in most of the cases that I'm aware of, there is not the navigating of the complex histories of enslavement and colonialism to understand how that is tied to how people have a certain sense of self-identity, how they relate to family and self and community. So there are massive gaps in terms of our understanding of self and the present and dominant mediums of healing. Many of these are reliant on American and European epistemologies that are not sensitive to the specific histories of us here in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Amandala, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess, coming out of the UK context, one of the things that happened when Caribbean people came to the UK in large numbers was we were excluded effectively from the education system, right? We were deemed to be educationally subnormal and thrown into sort of these schools that were substandard. And with that experience of displacement from Africa, displacement from the Caribbean, and second displacement, there was a growing movement of parents who set up supplementary schools, right? So these were schools often on a Saturday morning where children would go, they'll do their maths, their English, their science, whatever. Then in the afternoon, there'll be some sort of Pan-African or something related to Africa or something, the Caribbean, in order to supplement what was missing in the sort of day schools. So this could be something as well to sort of think about. If there's a way that if we're not getting moving forward with our day schools, are there other ways we can supplement education and take it into our own hands rather than leave it to the education department, whatever it is. Well.
Okay,
and
so
I agree. I completely agree with that. If we leave it to our education department, because right now in the Virgin Islands, we're struggling with the teaching of Virgin Islands and Caribbean history. And so we have left it up to our government, despite the fact that we have legislation since the year that I was born in 1983. We mandate the teaching of Virgin Islands and basic Caribbean history. But here in the Virgin Islands, we'll have to ask basically essentially in most cases, our parents or even grandparents. They received a lot of information back then, and then I did benefit because I had a teacher in my 9th grade who really for us to understand Virgin Islands, an extensive understanding of Caribbean history was her push, because she's a Pan-Africanist. And so with that, those are the special cases. The average Virgin Islands child in the last generation, is going to leave school without that knowledge. So curriculum is really big. And I look at it even from the US side as well, where you have a lot of white supremacy teaching within the curriculum, meaning that there is, a whole overhaul that needs to happen. And we also look at the responsibilities, as I pointed out in the report that I submitted to the United Nations, is that they have a responsibility to ensure that there's proper education, and meaning that we shouldn't still have textbooks that misstate history. We shouldn't have textbooks that really paint one race over the other. And then really we have a lot of works that need to make its way back into our curriculum. So it's really critical that we have to really form movements. If we rely on our education systems, I've experienced it as a former senator as well. Essentially, I was fighting against a broken system. We have to just do it on our own. And so through my youth group, we're making putting together initiatives for ourselves to just enter the schools, which I've done many times. I have shared reparations with children as young as very young. I've gone into schools to explain what it's about. Even some of our schools are more leaning to teaching, some schools that need a lot of help in terms of teaching history that were reflective of the community. So I just think initiatives, us going into schools, farming initiatives, us working collaboratively within the Caribbean so that we learn each other's histories, delegation building. One of the youth council members, he mentioned one of the things that should happen is our participation in our entities, our delegations, the United Nations, all these where we can voice our opinions, but there's also where we have to get trained to do those things as well. And so what I hope is, as we go forward, is that we, form these delegations regionally, globally, so we can make our mark in that way and have our voices highlighted.
All right, so I want to thank all of our panelists for making their contributions. I want to encourage you all to still stay because we have the second panel coming up, and we just want to end with just having everybody just exchange their ideas. So thank you, and we'll move on to the next panel discussion. Okay, so the next panel discussion is going to focus on what's next, what is next, and what is my role. Actions that youth can take to support the reparations struggle and bring about the transformation necessary in the institutions responsible for education, health, employment, and renewal of self, will, and worldview. First, we're going to invite Mr. Kibwe Copeland. He is the president of ICAMA Youth for Reparations. I believe this organization is based out of Guyana. Where? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure, of course, to be here. I think this conversation, I was listening all the while, and very, very good thoughts, very good comments, very good information being shared. As I said, my name is Kibwe Copeland, and I'm the president of ICIMBA. ICIMBA is the first reparation organization in the Caribbean. We started in 2017 on the 26th of November. It was actually a youth workshop that was established by the CARICOM Secretariat. Of course, this would be proffered by the CARICOM Reparations Commission to get young people more involved in the movement of reparatory justice. And from that workshop, the young people, including myself and others, would have worked on messaging and how we can get young people more involved in the movement. And instead of just allowing that information to be sent over to another set of people, we wanted to champion those ideas and started this organization called ICIMBA. Of course, we started under the leadership of Dr. Hilary Brown, who's the Program Manager for Human and Social Development of the CARICOM Secretariat, and Eric Phillips, the Chairman for the Ghana Reparations Committee. So it's a pleasure, of course, being here. It's a pleasure listening to all the stories, and of course, the knowledge is coming from persons in Trinidad and other parts of the world. I think of even today, the questions that were asked are very pertinent. Now, when I think about the whole idea of what next, the first word comes to mind is youth. Not merely because I'm a youth advocate, but I understand the power that comes with the masses. And according to United Nations, anybody under the age of 35 is considered youth, and which makes up 60% of the world's population. So I pedal back to the creation of ICIMBA. It was the same idea that pedaled the CRC, the CARICOM Reparations Commission, to push for youth involvement, because they understood the simple fact. But more than being a major stakeholder in today's society or in the world in general, which is something that a lot of the youth populace are unaware of, we are the inheritors of the negatives, that's the legacy of slavery. And as we hold good faith, we would be the inheritors of reparations. Now, the mantle will and must be passed on. And we must be ready and not ignorant when it's passed on and have to start from the beginning. But this takes me to a key factor that not only helps this movement, but is necessary for the buy-in, even to see the need to be a part or to even listen, which is education. One of the cornerstones behind the progress and the mandate of ICIMBA. Now, unless one is educated about reparations, its why and its benefits and how it connects with them on a personal level. Because reparations is deep, and anyone who is going to be willing to listen further, repeat what they would have learned, or more so champion this cause, whether in a small or a big way, must be knowledgeable and connect with the knowledge on a personal level. So that continued efforts to educate oneself and to share vital factual knowledge is important, dispelling the manipulating stereotypes, and most importantly, making the links. Because even though slavery happened decades ago, its legacy continues to plague and affect us even today. And that's something that we must always try to acknowledge. And just to give an example, when it comes to education, ICIMBA would have ventured out into a program called Sankofa, which, if you understand, the symbol of Sankofa means to go back to where you came from to inform where you're going. This program, we utilize, instead of just a normal education or traditional education, we utilize edutainment, whereby we utilize the arts to educate young people. We understand young people, they learn differently. And when I first started off in reparations, which is a little bit before I became an advocate in 2017, when you check on YouTube or anywhere, you see these long 1 hour, 2 hour speeches by Edith Haley Beckles or other professors, and you have to now dissect it. It has a lot of history, it has a lot of knowledge. For somebody who likes history like myself, I can understand, but looking at the majority, the populace today, young people, they're more captured by 3 minutes or 4 minutes videos, animations, and these kind of things. So utilizing poetry, music, drama, dance, anything possible to try to send this message of reparations, breaking up all these big conferences into small bits and bytes is what we would have tried to do to Sankofa. We would have utilized the schools, not only targeting the people of African descent, because we must always come to the realization that history affects both those who are the victims and those who also see us in that phase. Who sees us inferior is also a victim to that history. So that's one of the things that we've pushed from an educational standpoint. And Kimba has done work in Guyana, we've done work in Jamaica with the CIR, the Caribbean Reparations Research Center with Rain Shepherd. We've done work in South Africa, as far as South Africa, the United States, Antigua and Barbuda. So our work has been moving, and we've seen how this reparations movement has been unfolding. Of course, there's many challenges we get to, of course. But as I continue to call on youth to get involved, even as I point out education being the main instrument in moving forward, I wouldn't want to see young people just jump in and start shouting reparations now. They stole us, they sold us, they owe us reparations now. What I would like to see or encourage is that first organize ourselves. Here's where I would like to extend the membership of Ikimbo or groups like Ikimbo. We need to advocate, we need to educate, but in an organized manner. We need to apply some level of systems, bearing in mind that it is not just about sharing information, but understanding where the minds of the people are. It's about setting seeds. It's about what to start with, what to share and when. It's about continuously analyzing the fors and the against. The need for extensive research and creative ways, simplifying it. It's breaking up big words and making it very small so persons can understand. Not trying to say people are illiterate, but if you understand what happens to people of enslaved Africans, one of the legacies of it is a large amount of illiteracy. Jamaica being one of the Caribbean countries who had the largest amount of illiteracy. So we have to pay that in mind. And from listening from the conversation earlier in the first panel, I heard about the whole thing about post-colonial leaders and how they, of course, are taking advantage, and they, of course, have to, we pay some level of reparations to the people in the present day. I could speak to Guyana. In 2006, the government would have passed the Amerindians Act, which would give indigenous people 13-point-something% of the land, right, which is a form of reparations. And we see similar situation whereby, first reparations given to mankind was to slave owners for the loss of property, people. So we must still be cognizant, because when we speak about reparations, when we speak about slavery, we don't want to play into the naysayers. We have to understand the root cause, even to our post-colonial leaders taking advantage. It stems from that period of enslavement. That is also a legacy of slavery. And we have to understand, when we speak about slavery, we talk about the transatlantic slave trade. The naysayers like to say, slavery was in Africa how many years ago before the Caucasians got there in biblical times. We're not talking about slavery whereby tribes would fight against each other, capture the survivors, and then make them slaves. But at the same time, they had the opportunity to become upstanding persons within the community. We're talking about stripping persons of their culture, their names, their morals, moving them from their homeland, taking them to the Americas without pay, without any morale, working them until they die. That's the kind of slavery we talk about. That's what we're talking about when we talk about being advocates for reparations is against the transatlantic slave trade. And we have to be very, very stern in sticking at and making that particular point. Because trust me, as much as we are advocating here, there are persons who are working overtime on countering everything that we're trying to do here. So we don't want, at the end of the day, our talks just to be talks. We want more things like Georgetown University giving out some level of reparations, and the Gladstone families, of course, which came together, to give some funding towards reparations, or the deal that was done between, I think it was the Glasgow University and University of West Indies, that kind of stuff. We want more of that to happen. Of course, reparations in general. So I think it's very important for us to understand where we're at and what we're really fighting for. And I agree with most of the comments, all of the comments basically, right? And I think young people have to take a stand. We have to organize ourselves into groups, and we have to understand the situation, to understand what is at stake. But one of the things that I would like to really push, I think it's very ideal in any starting point when it comes to being an advocate for reparations, is where we are presently. I always like to look back at a particular comedian show by Dave Chappelle, a very popular American comedian. The comedy was about reparations being given out, and he was acting in several roles. He was once the TV anchor, and was saying that, reparations just given to people of African descent in America, trillions of dollars, etc., etc. And then you saw him in the streets talking to people, you see persons collecting their checks and so forth. Then there's another scene whereby he was talking or interviewing a man who had this big container truck. And he was saying, oh, I saw that you got your reparations money and you're now going into business in trucking. And the guy laughed and said, I'm not into trucking. I just bought a whole year's supply of cigarettes. Then another scene came with Bloomberg, and you saw the stocks going up in Fubu and Polo, and KFC lines was full. And what it said to me, basically what he's basically trying to portray in this comic film, is the state of the people. If the European government should actually apologize, accept that first point in the 10-point plan, and give a formal apology, and then give reparations tomorrow, I'm not completely sure that we'll be in a better state 10 years from now. We have to make sure that our people are ready for whatever form of reparations is going to come. That is why the CARICOM 10-point plan speaks to 10 different points that does not directly speak to just giving out checks. CARIFESTA 14 on the panel, we had a panel called Reparations More Than Money. And we have to really distinctly state that to a lot, because the young people is the first thing comes to mind. Who paying this money? Where the money coming from? But it's more than that. There's no way that no government can pay us for what we have. So basically, we have to find ways to really navigate through what is reparations and how we can push it forward. Just in closing, it's going to take a collective effort by young people. It's going to be a mission of organizing groups, for example, like Ikimba, and pushing forward towards advocating for reparations. But I do think that the young man from the Trinidad Youth Council, very vocal. I think he himself and his team should try to mimic such organizations and push forward them, just to ask the question of how will we move forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Copeland. I like that in words of Kwame Ture, organize, organize, organize. So at this point, we would like to invite Adiola Young. She is a sociologist based here in Trinidad and Tobago. So just give me one second. Yes, hi, Adiola, welcome.
Okay. All right. Pleasant good evening to everyone here. I'm really excited to be a part of this discussion. And the advice I would give on what is next and what is your role, it is a part of my journey as a young person, a young activist, and someone who has been a part of my own radical struggles, right? So before even figuring out your role, you need to understand what this struggle is all about. You need to understand what reparations are, why it is necessary, and in what forms will it be beneficial in a hyper-capitalist world under systemic violences and global hierarchies of white supremacy and anti-Blackness and all the oppressions that exist. We also have to understand that this is something that has to be fought for. It is not something that will be given to us. So we need to understand what channels are we going to use. Is it only the UN or Global North organizations? How many delegations are we going to send, or how many discussions are we going to be a part of? Or are we forming Black cooperatives, Black education facilities, etc., on our own terms? We need to understand what the response will be by these organizations, and it may be violent. Because you cannot depend on an imperialist nation or the global north to have a conscience or give you power over their profits. Because you have to understand the nature of capitalism and the violence that comes with that. Some of us are living in an illusion of global peace because of your class. And even your own people will try to undermine your reparations effort. And this could even be some of your leaders. So you have to understand what this struggle is all about, what challenges you will face, and how extremely important it is to decolonize your mind and be prepared for the type of violences that you will face. So that's my first point. Understanding that an apology is just the first step for reparations. And you listen to the words of Brother Kwame Ture when he speaks about they will try to pacify you with grand PR gestures. So things like a statue, a plaque, you'll get a street name. But what is the actual shift in power? Has any of these institutions really changed? You need to decipher what is the power that these organizations hold, how it is used, and what you want. And in order to reach to that point, reading and studying as a practice and the decolonization of your mind, understanding the history of your people and the systemic violences that exist, how it shapes and forms and manifests in your life is a very important step. So before we even think about what our role is, we need to know what company we're working for. We need to know what it entails and what violences that we will face. Understanding who are great Caribbean and Pan-Africanist intellectuals. And this is something that is very important because persons who have been through this type of struggle, because a lot of these genocidal things are not new, would give you a lot of tidbits and a lot of key ideas in order for you to be a part of the struggle. So understanding C.L.R. James, Walter Rodney, Claudia Jones, Kwame Ture, Frantz Fanon, M. Césaire, Marcus Garvey, and a lot of our Caribbean intellectuals and some of their writings are key things to have and to understand. To act, you need to be informed, because acting without information or acting with misinformation will not lead to liberation. And according to Brother Kwame Ture, mobilization and organization are not the same thing. So we must read, we must discuss, and we must have a common vision. We need to know how to operationalize our thoughts. Moving on to renewal of self. So this is a part of my personal journey as well. As a people, you must be curious about the past and its connections to our daily lives. How this makes you who you are, where you live, what opportunities your ancestors had, and what do you want as reparations. Here you will find a voice. Visit your national archives. Form your own spaces to share information with each other and create your own projects. Whether it be a group that helps you look for your ancestors in the region, and a personal friend of mine joined this Facebook group where, a lot of Caribbean people were trying to find their ancestors and sharing information with each other to form that bond, sharing photos, names, archive documents, starting from some of your birth papers of your grandparents. And building that community brings healing from a lot of the racial trauma. Knowing your identity brings a sense of ease. And I will give you an example of something I saw this week about the descendants of the persons who were massacred at the Tulsa Race Massacre, Black Wall Street. Those who were killed were placed in unmarked graves, so none of their descendants knew them or could inherit their estates. Recently, many of their Black descendants used DNA to match the graves so that they could at least know where their relatives are. And the sense of peace that it brought to some of those descendants is something that is a testament why it is important to try to find your ancestors. We need to have a focus on our historical and archaeological institutions, museums, and cultural stewardship to build this sense of community, and also to really venerate our ancestors in a spiritual way as well, which is very important. Another part of my journey was creating the content that I consume. So I lessen Western media sources and I focus on non-Western forces, reading different books from Africa, from Asia, from several oppressed peoples to understand the cultures that existed outside of the Western imperialist or Orientalism. Utilize social media platforms for learning as well, because there are many accounts that exist that teach you about your history, such as the National Archives and other Palestinian and socialist accounts that share key literature. And with that algorithm, you can link to more sources, and it is in an easy to read format. So even, you know, for you to be trying to curate that content, there's content that exists out there that will be linked when you lessen your Western media sources and you decolonize your mind. You can also create your own content, whether through art, films, poems, podcasts, social media posts. And this is important because we have to counteract the stifling and neglect of our culture by owning and distributing media. And this is a very important point. Advocate to be taught your history as young people, changing the CXC syllabus to have more in-depth study, learning about a lot of our local things that occurred here, the Black Power movement, Claudia Jones. And through that study, I have met a lot of people who have begun to work together on several projects by just having that information and us building community and connecting on it. Another important point, when you think about your role, you need to learn about the other forms of genocide and other oppressed peoples around you. So it's not just about learning about Black history, but there's a certain formula used by the global North and imperialists when they inflict systemic violence. And none of this is arbitrary. As we look to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, Sudan, Congo, Tigray, Tunisia, Hawaii, there are common threads that give you a global sense of what violence is and how to counteract that. Even in Latin America in the years gone by, in Nicaragua, Chile, and the murder of indigenous peoples. Learn about indentureship and indigenous peoples genocide in the Caribbean. We must find solidarity and learn from our history in order to advocate for ourselves, but we have to understand that there's common threads and a lot of oppressed people, and that unity amongst these various groups are very important. I can give you an example from the time of Black Lives Matter. There were persons who were from Hong Kong, and they were sharing a lot of their upgraded ways to protest and protect yourself with a lot of the Black Americans. So us forming that community and us, you know, understanding the different struggles of oppressed peoples are very important, because the ways in which we can come together and fight this global force can give us a lot of ideas, right? Make a list of what you consider your reparations to be and how you want to contribute. And also do not be afraid to be radical, right? Some of your rules will change as you grow and you learn. And even at 26 years old, my role was extremely radical in 2020 when there was the Black Lives Matter protests, when 3 men were killed in Mova. And remember Israel Clinton, remember Joel Jacobs, and Noel Diamond, who were killed by police on camera. Me and a group of my young attorney friends, we formed a group called Groundation, and we represented pro bono a lot of the protesters who were beaten and killed by police. Until this day, they are being represented for no charge. This is the ways in which we bridge the class divide, and we understand the importance of fighting anti-Blackness and police brutality and extrajudicial killings for our Black brethren in Mova and all our East Port of Spain persons that we have made friends with and support till this day. So understanding that, you know, you need to bridge the class divide, you need to understand how violent the responses will be even by your own people, and not being afraid to be radical and stand on your business. You know, even you see that when the Trinity College persons were kicked out for their hairstyles, their classmates supported them and they raised awareness on social media. And this is a way in which that you can support persons who are being affected. So to close, I'd just like to say that rest is also resistance. Take care of yourselves and your health, and also seek to build community and call out all forms of oppression.
Oh,
So
thank you so much, Adiola. So at this time, I want to welcome back our previous panelists. So I am Honorable Genevieve Whitaker, Amandla, Igwe. If you all can please turn on your camera, right? I'm seeing some of you all now. Great. And while I'm doing this, I also want to invite our audience to please leave questions and comments for our speakers tonight. So I'm seeing Gerald with his hand up. You can go ahead and unmute and make a comment or leave your question. Mr. Gerald? Yeah.
Okay, could you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, greetings to everyone. First of all, my name is Gerald Pereira. I'm the chairperson for the Organization for the Victory in Guyana. And that's Guyana's only revolutionary socialist and revolutionary Pan-Africanist formation, and vocally anti-imperialist. I would like, openly anti-imperialist, I would like to thank Sister Adiola Young for that beautiful presentation. And I would also like to thank my brother, Salandi. Let me comment quickly on what Brother Salandi said. He's absolutely right in addressing the issue of mental illness. And we have to revisit, as people who are fighting for our liberation, total emancipation, because as the great Caribbean theologian Cartwright David said in his book, Emancipation Still Coming. You see, we saw emancipation as a single act when we walked off the plantations. But if you look at Caribbean society today, we haven't changed much. I recall them neo-colonial plantations. I heard the term, we use this term about post-colonial leaders. I don't know what's post-colonial about them. I think that concept is absurd. And what we have is a form of not only neo-colonialism, but naked recolonization before us. We have in this country a good example of the US ambassador as the governor of this country. You wouldn't believe. She acts like the governor at the time before we got independence. But Brother Salandi, what he said is we need to get to people like Wade Nobles, Naeem Akbar, and Linda Myers, because in order to understand, to recover, and to heal, we have to understand, as he pointed out, that the Western tradition, and by Western I mean here to the North American tradition, of what constitutes psychology is alien to our tradition, because psychology is really about soul healing the soul. And the Western intellectual tradition, or the Western tradition, where you train psychologists and mental health workers in Western institution, they cannot locate. The soul is not something that can be located for them the way you can locate the heart. So the whole premise, as he pointed out, the epistemological tradition is faulty. So we need to build on that. There's a lot of work to be done. Also on Sister Young, tie the struggle for emancipation with the struggle against imperialism. My sister, you don't hear anybody talking about anti-imperialism in Guyana. Congratulations to you. We have many of our leaders who pay lip service to reparations, but pressure is being applied to them, on them. We know this for a fact. Let me give you an example. I think most of you are aware that David Cameron, when he was prime minister, he went to Jamaica. Can you recall that? Good. He visited Jamaica, and he said in Jamaica, there is no reparations. The issue of reparations is out. At that time, he was the leader of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister of Britain. He said Britain will help Jamaica to build a prison so they can send back a lot of those Jamaicans who are in prison to serve out their sentences in Jamaica. Only 2 persons across the Caribbean, there was some demonstration in Jamaica, but only 2 persons came out openly swinging in articles that were published all over attacking Cameron, and that was David Commission and myself. Cameron came to this country this year as foreign secretary and arrived in Guyana. This is a man who opposed these reparations, said plain that they will not adjust this, and he came into this country to tell the government of Guyana, the people of this country, that Britain is standing with Guyana against Venezuela. And not one self-professed Pan-Africanist or Black rights activist got up and demonstrated against this man. Not one. And you know why, brothers and sisters? I like the word my sister used. I believe in radical honesty. Radical is not the same as extreme. Radical comes from the Latin word radix, to get to the root of issues. Not one. You know why? Because I will put it very plain language for you. The frightened white people bad here. All the politicians. The frightened white people, because they have assets, they have the children studying at the universities in North America and so, and they do not want to be sanctioned. They're a bunch. We have a lot of cowards here. There are a lot of cowards. And the struggle for reparations must be linked with the struggle for total decolonization and true independence, and the struggle against neoliberal capitalism, which all the parties in the Caribbean and in Guyana are committed to.
Yes, hi, good night. Hi, Mr. Gerald. So unfortunately, we are crossing our time, and I know that everyone has been
I appreciate your intervention, and that's okay. I'll take it. Go on.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Gerald. I also want to recognize some of the people here. We have Dr. Janzira Kahina out of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Mr. Gerald Pereira, like he indicated, is from Guyana. These are some members, some Pan-Africanists and activists who work with us here at the Emancipation Support Committee and the Caribbean Pan-African Network. We have a Rother here as well. Ayademi Hines is joining us via YouTube. We have Saran Pravat here with us. So we want to thank everyone for joining us and giving us that support and understanding how critical this discussion is. At this point, I want to ask panelists to give their closing remarks, because we have exceeded our time, as important and exciting this discussion has been. So I want to invite Senator Genevieve Whitaker to start us off first, please, with your closing remarks.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you to all. Good evening again. This was an absolutely, we look at authenticity, the level of idealism, realism, and forward thinking and I look forward to. I remain committed to unity. I remain committed to working with all our various groups and our next steps. And there is some work involved, preparing for the delegations, preparing documentation, and most importantly, really effectuating change. We want our reparations. We want it now, right? And I even there's a local version of a song in that regard. So blessed evening to one and all. I look forward to more convenings and the work ahead as we fight for reparations for us as a people. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Salani.
Sure. So I found this to be a really excellent panel full of very powerful insights and ideas. And even as we talk about all of these issues, our governments are not even in this realm. Most of them are still in the realms of what is called, or what they call, sustainable development goals, which is ideas about development that often do not address any of these issues that we are talking about. So we are talking about these fancy national development plans that have all of these fancy graphics and fancy words and fancy language, but many of it does not resonate with the best of the indigenous knowledge and the best of the knowledge that comes out of many different forms of struggle. So I am under no illusions that our leaders in the majority are any close to being moved by the reason and the knowledge and insights that are coming out of these movements. So it means that we have a lot of work to do, not just to talk within specific circles, but how do we bring and involve people ordinary people in different communities into these issues? Because if you go into many communities, many people are oblivious to many of the things that we talk about. Just the very need to survive these very hostile, conditions and make ends meet means that people often have little time to do the research and read and be informed about many issues. So for those who have eyes, there is much work to be done to continue what I call bottom-up reparations. I do not trust our political leaders to further this issue of reparations because they have shown time after time again that they generally do not have the best interest of the people at heart. So the weight of the struggle falls on people to demonstrate and create alternative institutions and alternative frameworks for healing that do not rely on our dominant leaders and Western frameworks, but that we could rely on our own body of indigenous knowledge to create and recreate indigenous forms of healing and justice. Thank you.
Yes, hi, Ms. Faith.
Hi, okay, so I would just like to add to the previous comment actually, and also just reiterate what I would have put in the comments. And I think a lot of the ignorance, it's because history as a discipline, it is not appreciated, it is not respected. I can, personally speak, and in my year group, there are only 4 history students in an entire campus. So and I said that a lot of youth, they are aware and they want to make connections between things that they are noticing about our society, but they do not have history as a tool to make those connections. So I think, valuing history, really, that is part of the path to reparations. And, also, when we look at our politicians, I think a lot of them are, STEM majors, engineering, medicine, or lawyers maybe, and there's a colonial heritage and preference there, and undervaluing other majors and disciplines. So I think, we need to look at appreciating history. And just also to repeat or reiterate the appreciation for our indigenous practices. Looking at healing ourselves, I had the opportunity to do this Haitian dance and song, and the leader of the dance was looking at methodologies, indigenous methodologies in which we can heal ourselves, not just through Western medicines, but also our own original practices that existed. And, we have abandoned, not by choice, that we're suppressed. So just to reiterate those two, and to bring them back to light. And that is how I would like to conclude.
Yes, thank you. As a former history major myself, I endorse that statement. Mr. Copeland?
Yes, I like the comments, of course, made. I believe that we as a people, if we are going to really gain any form of reparations, we have to first start within. So I do agree with you, Mr. Landy, when it comes to bottom-up reparations. I really love the Black Panther movement. And the reason why I like the Black Panther movement, because it showed people taking a stand for themselves. It wasn't about them asking for favors. It was them saying, you know what, we will protect our people, we will have a sense of direction, and we will course our own direction forward. I think that's the approach that we have to take. And I know someone asked earlier about success stories or fighting stories about people of African descent. And as you said, Faith, you spoke about Haiti. And Haiti, of course, has one of the best historical stories about how they would have become the first Black republic. Excuse me. Yes, looking at Toussaint Louverture, even Dessalines in 1804. So I think these stories we have to take as prototypes to how we should move forward. We have to find a sense of direction amongst ourselves. Even though we are asking for the European countries and so on to give us reparations, which is owed to us, we amongst ourselves have to hold ourselves accountable. How are we mentally? How are we when it comes to our own self-consciousness, our own spirituality? How do we move away from the stereotypes that make things like voodoo seems to be some ancient form of witchcraft? how do we look and center back into self? I think that is very important. We have to start. And that's one last thing to say, to put my words into more practical context. If you're going to go into a boxing match, I don't expect you to go on your knees and say, please give me a chance, I'm human. You better put on your boxing gloves and punch as well. And that's my final words moving forward.
Thank you, Adiola.
For what I would like to say, I'd like to encourage everybody here to continue the fight. I know that, this is something that is severely underfunded and you have a lot of long nights and, a lot of unpaid labor. I really want you to think about rest as resistance as well, taking care of your health as someone who's, into midnight oil and really came up with health problems because of the level of work that this entails. Understand that we need to come together, and please invite me to, any of the things that you have going on, and I'll share it with my other colleagues. So let's support each other as well in the things that you have doing in the region as well, because I'm very much interested. So if everyone can share, some of the things that they have going on and how we can contribute to it, it would be great. Thanks.
Okay, so I want to thank everyone again, our esteemed panelists and featured speaker, our guests, our participants, those who would have contributed to the conversation, and of course the organizers coming from the National Reconstituted Trinidad and Reparations Committee. I know it's a mouthful, but they're doing amazing work. They're really trying to make an impact in Trinidad and Tobago right now. And as you can see, they're reaching out to the youth because they understand that the reparations fight is not a now for now thing. It's gonna take generations to reach where we need to be. And in this regard, they're extending their hand to the up and coming youth. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us. This is the end of our discussion, but it's not the end of the struggle by any means. And if you're interested in volunteering or assisting with this reparations movement, or even getting more information about reparations, I want to encourage people to visit the CARICOM Reparations Commission website. The Trinidad and Tobago National Reconstituted Reparations Committee has a Facebook page, so please go. Sorry, not Facebook, an Instagram page. So please go and visit them. And of course, please visit the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago Facebook page and Instagram. We also share a lot of information and content about reparations and African consciousness, African culture, and history on a whole. So I really just want to thank everyone for joining us and to have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.